Ed Thomas writes RMSO. Hello there. My name is Ed Thomas from Vancouver Island, British Columbia. Here's our encounter. During the fall of 2016, we took our boat to a popular fishing area at the mouth of Goldstream in Finlayson Arm. During the full salmon run, we fished until dark, and at this point we decided to putt back to the boat dock. On clear ride would take close to a half an hour to return to the dock. The Malahat Peaks over 1,100 feet was on our left, the Highlands Peak 500 feet on our right. We putted along the Malahat shoreline with our 50 horsepower 4-stroke Yamaha. Very good quiet motor. As we come around a rocky outcrop, we heard loud splashes, followed by something very large running up the mountain. Our spotlight couldn't find. I must note, I am an avid outdoorsman hunter. What we heard could not relate to any wild animal's reaction to seeing us crashing up a rocky cliff. We rounded another outcrop and heard more splashing in the water. This time, we caught a large, round figure in the water with our spotlight. I put the boat in neutral and kept the light on what we now believe was the back of his head. With the tide moving, I had to keep adjusting the boat. After a couple of minutes, we hear big splashes to the right of the figure in the water. I panned my light but could not see anything. Quickly put the light back on the figure we could see. Then more splashes from the left. I quickly panned the light, could not see anything to the left either. We watched the figure in the water for maybe 20 minutes. We could see it moving, but trying really hard not to. Then something unreal happened. I believe it took a mouthful of water and kind of choked on it. That's exactly the sound we heard, like a human took too much liquid and gurgled it. At that point, the figure's arms come up out of the water and started slamming its arms and hands on the water. It gave up trying to hide and stumbled up to the shore, where it fell in a heap. We could hear it catching its breath. Every breath had a little growl underneath. After a few minutes, it got up and went up a huge rock wall like nothing and disappeared. I believe we encountered at least 4 that night. Being in a boat, I did not want to get too close as I heard of rock throwing, so I played it safe and stayed a good distance from shore. My wife and I know what we seen that night. We'll never forget listening to it catching its breath and laying on shore. RMSO respond, when it got out of the water and climbed the rock, could you estimate the height, width, or weight? Could you tell what color the creature was? Thomas responds, we believe it to have been well over 8 feet tall, and I'd guess 3.5 to 4 feet wide at the shoulders. Hard to guess a weight as we didn't get a good profile view of it. It was huge. The wall it climbed after catching its breath had to be over 40 feet tall. It scaled that in mere seconds. All we seen was its back the entire time, but the creature was black as night. My wife was in total shock and awe of what we were seeing. Took her a while to really comprehend what she had just seen. Our thoughts are that these Bigfoot were also fishing in the Finlayson Arm Narrows in Goldstream, just like we were, which has a huge salmon run each fall. Hey Thomas, I'd like to thank you for sending us your Bigfoot sighting report. If anyone out there in the United States, Canada, the world has had a Bigfoot sighting, we want to hear from you. And I don't care if it happened last week, last month, 100 years ago.
The last thing Jacob Gray filmed was something standing outside his tent. He was alone, 6,000 feet above sea level, deep inside one of the most remote corners of Olympic National Park. No signal, no help within miles. And whatever was on that footage, it was not an animal he recognized. 3 arrows were stuck upright in the ground near his campsite, and Lee found him, not fired, not scattered, standing straight up, planted deliberately into the earth, like a warning nobody had been alive to read. His remains were discovered 11 miles from where he abandoned his bike, in the opposite direction from where he told his family he was going, at an elevation most experienced climbers struggle to reach, alongside the bones of 2 other people who had vanished years before him and whose families had long since stopped hoping. The sheriff who arrived at the scene used a word that nobody in law enforcement uses casually: nest. That was August 2018. Jacob had been missing for 16 months, and the answers that came back from that mountain were somehow worse than no answers at all. Before we go any further, I need you to understand something about where this happened, because this park has a history, and Jacob Gray is not the first person to walk into these mountains and never walk back out. This is the case of Jacob Gray, and it is far stranger than the official record will ever admit. Jacob was 22 years old in April 2017. He had grown up in Santa Cruz, California in the kind of household where the outdoors was not a hobby. It was a way of life. He surfed, he climbed. He spent extended time alone in Yosemite and knew wilderness environments the way most people know their own neighborhood. His father, Randy, described him as genuinely capable out there, not reckless, not inexperienced. Someone who had put in the hours and earned the right to move through wild places with confidence. At that point in his life, Jacob was doing long cycling trips across the country. He had come to Port Townsend in Washington state to spend time with his mother and grandmother. He was not in any kind of crisis. Everyone who knew him described him as mentally sharp, physically fit, and excited about what came next. He had recently told his father he was thinking about becoming a firefighter or an EMT. He had plans. He had a future. He had a reason to come home. On the morning of April 5th, 2017, he told his mother and grandmother he was going to cycle through Olympic National Park and camp out for a couple of days. This was not unusual. He knew the park. He had been there before. He attached a custom trailer to his bicycle, a trailer his own father had modified for him, and packed his camping gear, food, water, warm clothing, and a composite bow with arrows. Why nobody is entirely sure. Hunting is not permitted inside the national park. Perhaps it was for practice. Perhaps it was for protection. Perhaps Jacob, for reasons we will never fully know, felt he might need it. Whatever the reason, he brought it. And in hindsight, that detail sits uncomfortably with everything that came after. He left that morning and rode down Sol Duck Hot Springs Road into the park. That was the last time anyone who knew him saw him alive. The following day, April 6th, hikers on the Sol Duck Trail found something that did not look right. A bicycle with a custom trailer tipped over at the side of the trail, covered with a tarp. Not hidden, not concealed with any real effort, just covered, the way you might cover something you intended to come back to. Everything was still inside. Camping gear, wallet, personal identification, a list of phone numbers. The bow was on the ground nearby, and 4 arrows were stuck straight up out of the earth beside it. Remember those arrows, because they are going to come back. The hikers called the park rangers. The rangers arrived, looked at the scene, and were not entirely sure what they were looking at. There was nothing definitive, no signs of a struggle, no blood, no indication that anything violent had happened here. The bike was in perfect condition, no flat tire, no damage to the frame. The trailer was completely intact. Whoever had left this had not crashed, had not been forced off the road, had not been in any kind of accident. But here is the part that does not add up. Whoever left this scene had taken time to cover the trailer with a tarp. That is a calm, deliberate action. It takes time. It suggests someone planning to return. But that same person had also gone through the trailer and removed specific survival items before leaving: a water filter, a backpack, the tent, the sleeping bag. They took exactly what a person would take if they intended to survive out there for a while. And they left behind exactly what a person abandons when they are stripping down to move fast. So which was it? A calm departure or a desperate one? The tarp says calm. The missing gear says he was preparing to disappear into deep wilderness. Both of those things are true at the same time, and they should not be. The rangers conducted a quick search of the surrounding area. They called into the trees. Nothing answered. They walked along the river and noted it was running high, fast, and dangerously cold. They found no trace of whoever the bike belonged to, and then they left the scene there, untouched, for 2 more days. When the belongings were still sitting in the exact same spot on April 7th, the rangers finally retrieved the list of phone numbers from the trailer and started making calls. That is when Jacob's family found out their son was missing. And the moment they heard the details, they knew something was wrong. Jacob would never abandon his gear like that. Not the wallet, not the identification, not days on end. The family said it plainly. This was completely out of character for him. Jacob respected his equipment. He depended on it. A skilled outdoorsman does not walk away from his tent, his sleeping bag, and his identification and just leave them sitting in the open for anyone to take, unless something made him. His father, Randy, did not wait. He dropped everything, told his employer he needed time off, and drove to Washington. But by the time he was even notified, Jacob had already been missing for 3 to 4 days. The trail, whatever trail there was, had already gone cold. What Randy found when he arrived was a search operation that was, in his view, moving far too slowly. And what happened next is the part of this case that still makes people angry. The Park Service had put together a search using their own rangers, but the resources felt thin. Part of the reason may have been that the park was simultaneously dealing with another incident, a downed aircraft, elsewhere in the forest. Whatever the cause, the effort directed at finding Jacob did not match the urgency his family felt. So Randy started reaching out to outside teams. A volunteer organization called the West Coast Search Dogs of Washington offered to bring in trained scent detection dogs. "We have used dogs for search and rescue for hundreds of years for one simple reason: they work." Randy wanted them in the park immediately. The Park Service said no. It took a public petition on Change.org, signatures from strangers on the internet, to pressure the park into finally allowing the dog teams to enter. By the time the dogs were actually deployed, Jacob had been missing for a full week. A week in freezing wilderness, with every passing hour cutting his odds of survival. There was something else. Something even harder to understand. Jacob's older brother was serving in the Coast Guard at the time. Through that connection, the family had access to helicopters fitted with thermal imaging cameras, the kind of equipment that can pick up a human heat signature from the air, through tree cover, in places searchers on foot could never reach. They offered them to the Park Service. The park denied that too. Think about what that means. A young man missing in one of the most vast and rugged wilderness areas in the United States. Freezing temperatures, his family offering thermal imaging aircraft at no cost, and the Park Service turning it down. If Jacob had fallen into that river, experts estimated he would have survived no more than 20 minutes in water that cold, especially weighed down by the heavy clothing he was wearing. Every tool that might have found him in those critical early days, the dogs, the helicopters, the thermal cameras, was either delayed or refused. Randy and Jacob's cousin Danny eventually put on wetsuits and searched the freezing river themselves, by hand, because the people whose job it was to search would not bring in the equipment to do it properly. Expert trackers from the Olympic Mountain Rescue Team were finally brought in, and they found something near the river. It appeared someone had removed their boots and changed into running shoes near the road, then walked toward the river. About 30 yards downstream, there were marks suggesting that something, or someone, had desperately tried to climb out of the water and may have managed it. The trackers were careful. They said they could not confirm it was a person, only that it was a possibility. When the search dogs were finally allowed in on the 13th, 2 of them reacted at a log jam on that same river, indicating something. But a complete search of the log jams for miles downstream produced nothing: no body, no clothing, no trace. And when the dogs were brought to the spot where something appeared to have climbed out of the water, they could not pick up a scent to follow, which may mean it was never Jacob in the water at all. By mid-April, the Park Service announced there were not enough clues to justify continuing the same scale. One ranger described finding Jacob as being like finding a needle in a haystack. The official search wound down. Randy refused to stop. He brought in the Clallam County Search and Rescue Team, 100 personnel, including volunteers, who picked up exactly where the Park Service had given up. In May, they found a pair of shorts matching a brand Jacob was known to wear. They were sent to a lab in Seattle for DNA testing. The results were never conclusive. In late July 2017, more than 100 people from multiple organizations carried out one final massive search. It was later described as one of the most thorough and coordinated search efforts in the history of Clallam County. They found nothing, and that, everyone believed, was the end of the story. It was not. On August 10th, 2018, 16 months later, a group of National Park Service staff and field biologists were conducting routine field work. They were studying marmots in the high country, about 15 miles from where Jacob had abandoned his bike. They came across outdoor clothing and gear scattered across a ridgeline at an elevation of more than 5,000 feet. It was Jacob's. His clothing, strewn across the ridge. A specialized team was brought into a site near a remote alpine lake, and what they found there was not what anyone expected. There was a makeshift camp, a fire pit, food, water, a water filter, survival equipment. Someone had been living there, not just passing through, but staying, for what appeared to be an extended period of time. And then they found the remains, bones confirmed as Jacob's through dental analysis on August 15th. But the team kept searching the surrounding area. And what they uncovered next is the reason this case is not just a tragic disappearance. It is something else entirely. More bones, belonging to other people. The coroner identified remains from 2 additional individuals. Jack Maxim, a 34-year-old hunter who vanished from this same park in 2010. Diane Bruno, a 33-year-old hiker who disappeared in 2012. Their bones were far more decomposed than Jacob's. completely bleached from years of exposure to the elements. They had been dead for years before Jacob ever set foot on that mountain. 3 people, 3 separate disappearances spanning nearly a decade, all ending in the same remote stretch of wilderness, 6,000 feet above sea level, 11 miles from the nearest trail, in a location so brutally difficult to reach that the sheriff's own investigators struggled to get there. There was no shelter nearby that could explain it, no cave, no hidden structure, no road, no sign of ongoing human activity. If a person had been bringing victims to this place, they would have had to be a ghost, moving 11 miles into trackless alpine wilderness, over and over across years, leaving no trace of themselves at all, and near the campsite planted upright in the ground. 3 arrows, the same as the bike, the same deliberate placement, standing straight up out of the earth, at 2 locations 11 miles apart, marking both the place Jacob vanished and the place he was found. Sheriff's investigators looked at all of it. 3 sets of human remains, the remote location, the strange arrangement, and used a word that stops you cold when you hear it from law enforcement. A nest, a possible human dumping ground, or a nest. The medical examiner from King County concluded that Jacob most likely died from natural causes, specifically suspected exposure. But she chose the words carefully. She stated there was no indication of malicious intent and no visible injuries on the remains. She also acknowledged that a definitive conclusion was simply not possible. The deputy coroner listed the official cause of death as inconclusive. Here is why that conclusion is so hard to accept. Jacob did not die from a lack of resources. He had a fire, they found a lighter in his pocket, he had food, he had water, he had a filter. He had survival gear and the skills to use all of it. He was an experienced outdoorsman at a camp he had built and maintained. People do not die of exposure when they have a working fire and the means to keep it going, unless something stopped them, unless something kept them from leaving, unless something was out there. And then there is the phone. When investigators recovered Jacob's cell phone and pulled the data, they found a short video file, just a few seconds, shot through what appeared to be a small scope or telescope aimed at the campsite from a distance. The footage showed a large figure, dark, covered in fur or hair, standing upright, motionless, watching the tent. The tent stood just over 3 feet tall. The figure dwarfed it, and it was not the size alone that disturbed the people who saw it. It was the stillness, the way it watched, not the panicked reaction of a startled animal. Something patient, something that observed before it moved, something that seemed to understand exactly what it was looking at. Bigfoot researcher Tanya Barbara reviewed the footage. She had been working alongside law enforcement on missing persons cases in wilderness areas since 2008. Her conclusion was blunt. She believed Jacob had filmed a Bigfoot, and she believed that whatever was in that footage was responsible for what happened to him. Jacob also tried to call 911 on the night of April 5th. The call never connected. The signal could not reach. Whatever happened, it began that night, alone in the dark with no way to reach the outside world. Jacob's mother, Laura, never accepted the Bigfoot theory, and I want to be fair to her because grief deserves honesty, not sensationalism. She believed her son may have fallen victim to something tragic but ordinary, a bear, a rock slide, a fatal accident. She told investigators Jacob had changed after her divorce from Randy several years earlier, that he had become more withdrawn, that losing his childhood home had hit him hard, that he was never quite the same afterward. These are real, human explanations from a mother trying to make sense of the unthinkable. And they deserve to sit in this story alongside everything else. But conventional explanations run into the same walls every time. A bear attack scatters remains in a recognizable pattern. What was found at this site did not match predator behavior. Leg bones and ribs grouped together, pelvises and fragments positioned separately, in an arrangement that corresponds to no known animal in the Pacific Northwest. A rock slide leaves injuries. The medical examiner found none. A human killer takes the wallet. Jacob's wallet was found at the site with cash and credit cards still inside, completely untouched. An animal does not understand what a wallet is. A person does. Whatever was at that site fit neither category. And no conventional explanation accounts for 2 other people dead for years, found in the exact same impossible-to-reach location. Here is the part of this case that almost nobody talks about. Jacob Gray is not an isolated incident. Olympic National Park has a long, quiet history of people walking into its wilderness and simply ceasing to exist. Some are found years later. Many are never found at all. The park covers nearly 1 million acres and 96% of it is designated wilderness, pristine, roadless, and in many places never fully explored by a single human being. This is the kind of pattern that author David Paulides documented in his Missing 411 work. Cases clustered in national parks and wilderness areas that share strange, recurring details. People vanishing in terrain they knew well. Experienced outdoorsmen disappearing without a trace. Remains turning up in places that searchers had already covered. At elevations the victims had no logical reason to reach. Gear abandoned, clothing removed or missing. And official causes of death that get filed as inconclusive because nothing about them fits. Jacob's case ticks nearly every one of those boxes. An experienced person, disappearing in familiar wilderness, traveling in the wrong direction, found at high elevation, gear abandoned, clothing scattered across a ridgeline, a cause of death no one could confirm, and a piece of evidence, that footage that the official narrative simply set aside because it had no category to place it in. I am not telling you what to believe. I am telling you what the pattern looks like when you stop looking at this case in isolation and start looking at it as one of many. Randy Gray returned to the mountain after his son's remains were identified. Alone, in the wilderness where Jacob had spent his final days, he searched the ground himself, and he found something the professional teams had missed. A small bone, a finger bone, his son's. He did not hand it over to authorities. He dug a small hole in the earth with his own hands, placed the bone inside, and marked the spot with a cross made from rope and wood. A father's farewell, in the only place left on earth that felt right. Jacob had told his family that after Olympic, he was going to make his way to Florida to reconnect with his brother. He had plans, he had a future, he never got there. The mountain held on to him instead. So where does this case actually stand? No charges have ever been filed. No official explanation has been accepted as definitive. The cause of death remains inconclusive. The phone footage has never been released to the public in full. And the central question, why 3 people vanished in the same remote section of the same park across nearly a decade, has never been formally investigated as a connected event. The official position is that Jacob Gray died from exposure, alone, lost, in a wilderness he knew well, with survival equipment he knew how to use, after somehow traveling 11 miles in the opposite direction from where he said he was going, to a location most people cannot reach, where 2 other missing people had already died. That is the official position. Now lay every piece down side by side and look at the whole picture. An experienced outdoorsman abandons his bike and most of his gear. 4 arrows planted upright beside it. He travels 11 miles in the wrong direction to 6,000 feet. He builds a camp and lives there. He films something large and upright watching his tent in the dead of night. He tries to call for help and cannot reach anyone. He dies at a camp with everything he needed to survive. His remains are found alongside 2 other people who disappeared years before. 3 more arrows planted upright in the ground nearby. And the sheriff who stood at that scene used the word nest. You can call it exposure. You can call it tragedy. You can call it coincidence. But you have to ignore an awful lot to make any of those words fit. Olympic National Park sees 3 million visitors a year, and the overwhelming majority come and go safely. It is genuinely one of the most beautiful places in North America. I am not telling you to be afraid of it. I am telling you to respect it, because there are valleys in those mountains that no human being has ever walked through. Ridgelines that have never been documented. Corners of that wilderness that exist entirely beyond the reach of trails, rangers, and search teams. Most of what lives out there is cataloged, studied, and understood. Not all of it. Cases like Jacob's do not get resolved the way we want them to. There is no courtroom verdict, no confirmed cause, no moment where the mystery collapses into clarity. The mountain gave back what it chose to give back and kept everything else. What happened to Jacob Gray, Jack Maxim, and Diane Bruno may one day be explained. Science may catch up, evidence may surface. Someone may finally connect what should have been connected years ago. Or the Olympic Mountains may simply keep their silence, the way they have for 100 years, the way wilderness always does when it decides something is not for us to know. If you have ever spent a night deep in a forest, really deep, far from any road or light, you know the feeling I am talking about. That shift in the air, that certainty, with no evidence behind it, that something out there is aware of you. Most of the time it is nothing. Your mind playing tricks in the dark. Most of the time. Jacob Gray was 22 years old. He was skilled, experienced, and careful. He knew exactly what he was doing out there. None of it was enough, so stay aware out there. Tell people where you are going and mean it. Trust your instincts. And if you are ever deep in a place like Olympic and the forest goes quiet around you, pay attention to what it is telling you. Jacob tried to. He just ran out of time. If this case stayed with you the way it stays with me, subscribe to Spooky Specters Stories and turn on notifications, because cases exactly like this one, where the evidence points somewhere official investigators refuse to follow, are what this channel was built for. And I want to hear from you. What do you think really happened out there? Was it exposure, foul play, a predator we already know about, or one we don't? Drop your theory in the comments. These wild places hold more unanswered stories than any of us realize. And the more we talk about them, the closer we get to the truth. Stay safe out there and keep your eyes on the tree line.